Well, welcome everybody to tonight's 2023 forecast. Okay, this is Media Monk, and I'm joined by um, Kim Marie, of course, the managing director for the network. So we're going to get started in about 2 or 3 minutes. We noticed that we've got a pretty good group tonight, so we're going to give everybody a chance to get on. For those of you that are relatively new to this, you're going to have a GoToWebinar control panel that has a mute button. You can instant message people, etc. But the whole thing is that's that little orange arrow. And so you want to make sure you expand that to get all your capabilities. Most of you know that by now. I think Kim, as organizer, had an automatic starting on the recording. So I guess we are live and we are recording, Kim. So I think the two things.
Now.
Yeah, well,
okay.
that's all right. I can clip it a little bit.
Okay.
Yeah, no problem. So we're about 1 minute away, and the announcements I think we want to talk about is we're going to initiate one of our course sales for January, and so we're going to offer 25% off, $50 discount on our segment 1 and segment 2 digital materials. We're going to offer. That's segment one, of course, is where you'd want to start as a new student. That's the philosophy, the archetypes of EA, the planetary method of chart interpretation, the archetypes, everything that you want to know to get started. Lots of information in the registered associates area of the website. In fact, everything is digitized in there now as streaming videos. You get complete and lifetime access to all that information for what will be $150 for that segment 1 or segment 2 course, digitized course. So keep that in mind. If you're new to astrology and you're not sure about getting course materials or starting something like that, and again, remember, as an EA student, as a registered associate, you do not have to pursue certification, but the EA course would be the right way to consider that possibility for you in the future. However, there's just a lot of free floaters out there that want to study astrology and want to learn more about the EA method through the eyes of the EA inner circle, like Kim Marie, Maurice Fernandez, Mark Jones, other EA astrologers. They are kind of, we put them into what we call the Astro Library, and we have a lifetime access subscription to the Astro Library. You pay once and only once, and you have lifetime access to over 700 hours of EA information in 3 different categories. So keep that in mind. 25% off EAN course, the digital versions of both segment 1 and segment 2, or the Astro Library. Lots of value there. And I'll be making those changes on the website as we progress tonight through tonight's webinar. And with that, I'll turn it over to you, Kim Marie. Welcome for being here, everybody.
All right, welcome everyone. Happy New Year. We are recording this on January 4th. And so we're very, very close to the 3rd USA Pluto return, which I will speak to tonight as well. Leroy jumped into our course sales. So my first 2 slides, and I'm going to go backwards on. Here's our housekeeping slide that I always have. Here's my introduction. We're just going to move right through those. Numerology. 2023 switches to a 7-year, and it's known as an inner reflection and spiritual year. And so you can see we are moving ourselves about 2/3 of the way through a 9-year collectively for all of us, those of us who use this calendar system. And when we go through those deep inner reflections, we can decide if we are satisfied and congruent with how our life is going, or through that inner introspection, we can still make changes if we would like to see things differently in our world. And so I put some keywords in there for 7 years: introspection, analysis, intuition, reflection, seclusion, research, faith, spiritual awakenings, knowledge gathering, solitude, and inward focus. What's interesting is as we've got that energy in a 7 year to turn inward and hear our inner voice and reflect on everything, in 2023, it can have some conflicts because we have 3 of the outer planets changing signs. And whenever the slower moving planets change signs of the zodiac, it can create major changes. The trends shift. And for instance, as when Pluto dips into Aquarius on the spring equinox, that happens all over the world for all of us at the same time. Doesn't matter what country we're in or what continent we're on. We all experience Pluto and Aquarius together. So these 3 outer planets shifting signs is, again, going to conflict with that energy to go inward. So we're going to be outward, inward, outward, inward. And it's going to be a natural ebb and flow that you'll just want to get in rhythm with this year. When we saturate in that outer world and it's too much information, too much going on, we can naturally pull inward, find a new equilibrium, a new balance and understanding in ourself, and then we can go back out again. And so here's going to be that ebb and flow we go through all year. Mercury by element. Mercury, with its retrograde cycles, they reverse through the elements. And you can see here on your screen how I've listed the 4 elements and how much of the year Mercury is in each of those elements by sign. And of course, you can see here on your screen, hold on, I'm going to get my little laser pointer going. You can see here by the green arrow that we have Mercury in the earth element, Taurus, Virgo, Capricorn, 7 months out of this year, half the year. This alone, Mercury in earth, is going to tend to slow down communications. I just did a free Mercury retrograde podcast in Capricorn. You can go access it on our website. I think you can also find it on our YouTube channel if you want to go there. I spoke in more detail about this current retrograde cycle that's going on in Capricorn right now. However, again, Mercury half the year in the earth element will slow down communications. It will sometimes require us to do a little more thinking and pondering before we speak it out. We want to, make sure that our thoughts are making sense in our world, and we want to get to the essence or be practical with how we are speaking. Leroy was just, he's doing his winter changes on our website, and he ran across an old transcript of a Jeffrey Green article or workshop, I think, by Mercury. And you can see that it is down here. It'll be in your PowerPoint slides as a PDF that you can click on and go access and read. So I just share that with you. As we go through this Mercury retrograde by element. Leroy was like, gosh, that was pretty good reading that article again. And so invite you all to review that for Mercury retrograde, and perhaps it'll be helpful for you in having some of your clarity in communications over this next year. I have a lot of charts for tonight. I will try and go through them as smoothly as possible. There'll get to be a little bit of repetitive familiarity as we go through them. So I think we'll be a little bit faster as we move through. Then I always draw up the Ingress chart, and I tend to draw up my charts for Washington, D.C., being a US citizen and using that as the generics of what we're going through. And I also did the 0-degree Aries so that this chart will be similar for all of us around the planet. First of all, what we're seeing for a few years during this time is the fact that all of the planets from Sun through Mars are within 150 degrees of each other. So it makes a concentration of energy in one half of our chart, wherever that falls by transits. Now, Mars will go direct here, mid-January, 8 degrees Gemini. It'll probably be further into February before it gets to that opposition with the sun. We'll see how long that takes. I didn't look up the details of that. But again, it creates a focus in some area of our chart where a hemisphere becomes dominated and gives us opportunities to bring about change if we want. The other dominant thing about the Ingress chart is these planets in Capricorn making trines to the North Node and Taurus, or the North Node and Uranus in Taurus, and they happen to be joined by the Moon. And so when we have this many planets in Earth signs making trines, it's either going to be resource rewards or resource expenses that can come along unexpectedly. We could have a mixture of both. Trines are always the results of prior efforts. And most of these, well, there's a combination of waxing and waning trines. So there can be some of our own personal efforts, waxing, and efforts with others with the waning trines. It puts a big emphasis for the year on that physical world. Just like we have Mercury in Earth's signs for 7 months of the year, this is kind of like the imprint for this calendar year. And here again, you know, a plethora of planets in Earth signs. Nice, smooth relationship, but it does require us to make physical efforts with our life over this year. It also can be a natural time period for us to review what we value around our resources. You know, Capricorn wants to accumulate resources. Taurus wants to simplify resources. So we're all going to be in our own personal rhythms with our relationships to money, to material goods, to our bank accounts, to whatever we consider to be resources in that physical world. How do you want to make that effort? That's the other thing about trines. An ease of effort can create an ease of results. Rather than the laziness of a trine, we want to make those efforts. So where is that happening for you right now? Are you one of those who makes your New Year's goals? If so, there's some energy and things really moving forward through this month of January to implement whatever changes there are that we want to make. I also thought, and again, when I bring up a chart, we're not going to go through every aspect and everything that's going on. Otherwise, we won't ever get past this chart over the next 2 hours. So I'm just trying to touch base on some of the highlights and major themes. But, you know, Jupiter has just re-entered Aries for 5 months, and it's going to speed through, you know, 30 degrees of the sign of Aries in half a year. And so here we are on the new year with Jupiter at 1 degree Aries. And I think this also is conducive to New Year's goals, new beginnings, really wanting to initiate and start looking at something from a different perspective. And of course, wherever Jupiter is transiting in your natal house will be where there is a focus for you, where you want to initiate, start over, begin anew. Now, I kind of, I think I did this somewhat last year, but I'm starting to switch and do these forecasts as a, just calendar year. So as we go through these slides, I'm going to have a repeating theme where I have 2023 highlights, and I kind of just list some aspects or ingresses, planetary stations that just kind of stick out for me throughout the year as I kind of went through the calendar. And so we'll put up a page like this, and then we'll look at a few charts that relate to these planetary energies that you see on the screen here. And so I won't take the time to necessarily go through all of these because we'll have some slides for them. The one that I will point out is the fact that in January, on the 12th, the 18th, and the 22nd, we have 3 planets go stationary direct. And when Uranus does on January 22nd, then every planet in the zodiac is going to be moving in a direct motion for 3 months. Here again, the beginning of this year. Sometimes we'll get a few days, sometimes we'll get a few weeks of all the planets direct. They just happen to be in a rhythm. It's going to change in a couple of years or two. Jupiter's going to come along and its retrograde cycle is going to come into the beginning of the year, which will switch all this up. But we've got a couple years time period right now in which we get a couple of months of all the planets direct. And I have this coming at the beginning of the calendar year. Oh, have I said this is a good time period to really kind of make your initiations, move forward, work with that Capricorn energy of setting your goals and then going about whatever you want to do with that. So I just want to stick that one or mention that one for you. However, moving into charts, and I'll explain in a moment why I use this chart for July 4th. I do want to mention the fact that we are just beyond the USA having its 3rd Pluto return. Thank you, international listeners, for allowing me to speak from a United States perspective. The 3rd return was on December 29th, and as of that date, Pluto has moved ahead in the skies from the natal USA Pluto position. It won't be back to that position for almost 250 years. This is the first time in our country's history that we have had a Pluto return. It happened 3 times with the retrograde cycle here in 2022. I've been calling it the soul identity crises. In addition to that, over the last few years, Pluto made 5 oppositions to natal Mercury. USA only has 2 retrograde planets, Mercury and Pluto, on July 4th, 1776. And so Pluto has been activating them, but we've also had Neptune in Pisces opposing itself natally and making last quarter squares to the USA, Mars in Gemini. And we've also got this Mars retrograde cycle here that we are finishing up. Mars, we've been having 3 Mars returns. Mars is going to go stationary direct, just shy of the USA natal Uranus in Gemini. And we've also have been having, at least for the 9:37 a.m. time period on July 4th, we've been having Saturn go over the USA moon. So all of this together has, it's we've been in this energy in 2020, 21, 22. Well, guess what? It's still there all the way through 2023, even if we no longer see these exact aspects on our screen. Transiting Pluto and transiting Neptune only travel a few degrees every year. So they're still within the orbs of making these aspects. We're now on the separating side of the aspects. So it brings in understanding, what's it all mean? Okay, here's how I want to go forward with this. But they're all pretty strongly impacting the soul of our country yet. Now, just going to remind you, last year, Venus was in Capricorn and it went retrograde just shy of Pluto and opposing the USA Mars. So what do we value as a country? What are our goals as a country? What do we want to see, happening for ourselves collectively in all of this diametrically opposed opinions and ideas, beliefs and lifestyles and attitudes that we have? Because that's really what we're working our way through. This year, Mercury went retrograde December 29th on the Pluto conjunction to natal Pluto, and Mercury went retrograde 2421 Capricorn, exactly opposite the USA natal Mercury at 2420. So all of the Cancer Capricorn energies, the US Democratic-led Congress passing, I can't remember what it's called. Let's call it the Defense of Same-Sex Marriage. Passing that the tail end of the year before the Republicans took over in the House, and just bringing that gender equality issue to a legality in some way. That can be part of all this that's going on with Cancer Capricorn. And we have been dealing with the gender issues here through the Pluto transits for quite a long time. It could also be reflected in transiting Saturn over the USA moon. In a mundane chart, the moon is the public, and it's the public opinions, and it's also the collective public emotions that we go through as a group. The intent of Aquarius is objectivity, but some of the woundedness and distortions of Aquarius, as we'll show on another screen here, can be the polarity of defending yesterday versus moving forward. It can be the inequalities of elitism. And so on January 3rd, for this Monkisi USA chart, Saturn made the third and final conjunction here. And so will we have a shifting of public opinion coming through now as we have moved past 22, as we've moved past these Pluto returns? This third Pluto return, including the third Saturn moon return, to me, and even the Neptune transits, have very, very strong flavors for the USA, because all this energy on December 29th is still pretty much right there on the Ingress chart for January 1st as well. So you can think of this chart as carrying forward with us all the way through. Now, very quickly, again, I've called it a soul identity crisis. Take your pick, whether it's economics or finances or gender issues or political issues or social issues. Every way we look at ourselves, immigration in this country is evolving, and it includes our collective self-image, because while the soul operates so deeply, that Saturn moon is going to come in there and work with the whole self-image issue as well. So progressive versus conservative issues, they're going to continue to go back and forth and back and forth and back and forth, because 2023-24, Pluto's going to retrograde from Aquarius back to Capricorn. So we can see maybe a public wariness coming, but we're still going to be walking through it for a while. And that includes that Saturn moon, as I said. Are we going to have the elitism between haves and have-nots socially? Or are we going to see things redistributing for fairness and equality? Stay tuned, we'll find out. But as Pluto is new phase to the natal USA Pluto, we're still going to have patriarchal distortions exposed. And we're going to start to see them as going, why are we still doing this? Why do we still agree with this stuff? Why doesn't this issue come out a little more fairly for all of us? And while it may create major changes on a federal level, I think we might start to see this Pluto new phase USA Pluto coming through more on local, state, and federal levels. It's kind of you know, the most common example would be in the USA, presidential elections every 4 years, halfway through midterm elections, and whatever party holds the presidential office, the opposite party has a tendency to gain seats and sometimes take over the Senate and the House. We did not have the big red Republican wave. And I think it might be some of that more public opinion going, we're tired of the oppositions, we're tired of the splitness, we're tired of the ineffectiveness and inertia. We want to see common sense energies moving us forward. Stay tuned, we'll see how it goes. I just will point out, though, for those of you who may not remember this, these Pluto new beginnings in the USA chart are going to last throughout this decade into the next decade. The US Supreme Court came into being with Pluto in mid-Aquarius. The Bill of Rights was adopted and ratified with transiting Pluto in mid-Aquarius. There were all kinds of new beginnings that happened to the USA as a brand new country, all the way through Pluto's last 20-year transit in Aquarius. We will see these same things happen here this year and the next few decades. And so don't forget about the USA Pluto return. It is not over. All right. Now, I briefly put the Ingress chart here just to show you the visual and just to remind you that every January 1st, transiting Sun is anywhere from 10 to 11 degrees Cancer. It always is opposing the natal US, or Capricorn, excuse me. It's always opposing the USA natal Sun in Cancer, and it's always squaring the USA Saturn in Libra. And we will always have the inner planets, Mercury and Venus, traveling with the Sun, either Sag or Capricorn, and opposing sometimes Mars, but many times all these Cancer planets as well. And so I just, again, want to just briefly point this out, that this is always going to be the case around New Year's for this country because of our birthday and how it causes the transits to just reflect going around the circle. Now, I wanted to briefly just say, a couple of years ago, I ran across some this article right here with Michael Casey, a senior astrologer. And I finally was able to get this article uploaded as a PDF. Michael Casey, I've not been able to run into a website for him, so I can't forward you there. But here's an article that in more detail explains some of the research that went on. Most of it, again, this is how Congress met every day. And then in 1989, old letters of Benjamin Franklin were found with him remembering, meaning more near history, he was still alive, saying, oh yeah, we all signed the Declaration of Independence somewhere between 9 and 11 a.m. And Casey's work led him to 9:37 a.m. As an evolutionary astrologer, I can really relate to this country being a fifth house Pluto with its exceptionalism, and I'm better than you, and all kinds of other things. So I just mentioned this. You can do your own research. You can use any chart that you like for the USA. There is not an exact consensus opinion amongst astrologers. This one works for me. Regardless of which July 4th chart you use, there will always be three major aspects on that day that just really emphasize inclusive versus exclusive trends in the US that reflects how we went back and forth between give me you're tired, you're hungry, you're poor, and build a wall. Between, all of the old laws on the books that, blacks and whites can't marry, towards, having interracial marriage is just Nobody thinks anything of it anymore. And now we're starting to do perhaps the same thing with some of the gender issues. We'll see all kinds of waves back and forth between those two trends. So one of the next things, next things, Saturn goes into Pisces in March, and it has about 2.5 years in a sign of the zodiac. And so here are the dates on your screen when Saturn will go into Pisces. It will have two aspects while it's in 2023. It will make waning 1 semi-sextile to Neptune while still in Aquarius, and it will make 1 waxing semi-sextile to Pluto while it is still in Aquarius. And so to me, blending these two, they really won't even stick out in astrology calendars, but it's Saturn having a little bit of input on how we want to look at reality on the planet Earth right now. And those later degrees of Capricorn can bring us insights, even if it's just one and done aspects. Now, when Saturn does go into Pisces, Saturn has a tendency to have anywhere from 2 to 3 retrograde cycles in one sign of the zodiac as it transits. So here's its dates in 23 when it retrogrades from 7 to 0 Pisces. Saturn in Pisces is finishing up a cycle around the zodiac. Saturn is that individuated structure of consciousness. And yet when it moves into Pisces, which is ruled by Neptune, it is that interface between our physical and non-physical worlds. And so whatever's manifested Saturn in our lives, if it doesn't make sense anymore, if it doesn't have a deep spiritual value to us, then it will be about releasing, releasing, releasing. That's what Pisces does. Pisces surrenders and releases. And so sometimes this will come along because we choose to release, and sometimes it will come along because we experience disillusionment. And so if we have any of that, and I used one word, but we can have disillusionment, disassociation, depression, some of those Piscean confusion, out of sort words and themes. Experiencing any of that is then source energy saying, this doesn't work for you anymore. It will turn us inward, and it will ask us what makes sense in our world. And so Saturn in Pisces is it's going to be one long surrender to source. Wow, I still get up every day, brush my teeth, put on my socks and shoes, and go do my job or cook for the kids or whatever it is that we have to do in our real manifested world. So we're going to have to be balancing that deep inner searching with being in the mundane day-to-day world. Now, Saturn in Pisces, Pisces rules the immune system. So just one little slide here. You really want to be working on strengthening your immune system, the Virgo polarity of diet, exercise, and rest. Or if not, there can be some collective as well as individual health crises, breakdowns. If our immune system breaks down, then whatever our genetic issues are, they can manifest out there in that physical world as diseases in some way. As we go through some of these webinars or PowerPoint slides, you're going to see me every so often saying, I will do a specific webinar on this, which means that I'll take this subject into 2 hours. Again, as an annual overview, we have to be honoring of our time and just kind of highlight some of these patterns for you, okay? We're going to have a Jupiter Chiron conjunction on March 12th, and that will happen at about 15 degrees Aries. And so the intent of these two as a planetary pair It's being able to heal ourselves through a broader sense of understanding Jupiter, why we have any wounds or traumas, or Aries, sense of inferiority complexes. I did not take the time to look at what the timing of the cycle is with Jupiter and Chiron. Jupiter, Pluto, 12 years. Jupiter, Neptune, 13. Jupiter, Uranus has a 14-year cycle. Jupiter, Chiron is going to weave its way probably between a dozen to 20 years, Jupiter, Saturn. And it's going to vary quite a bit because of how elliptical Jupiter's orbit is. So I didn't go to get that exact timing of how long the cycles are. What we do know is when we have that planetary conjunction, we end one cycle and we start a new one. And so here we have those Aries conjunctions to initiate a new sense of ourself, to initiate self-loving Aries in new ways, to initiate new self-help and self-care routines. We also can be looking to stand up for ourselves and balance ourselves with all of our relationships. And any relationship that is out of balance in our world can create anger. Because if someone's dominating us, we can feel a sense of frustration and anger and feel the urge to speak up, to stand up for ourselves. If we are distorted with the sadomasochisms of the patriarchy and we feel our freedom being taken from us in any way, it can resort to extremes of violence. Both can show up. The anger and violence can definitely show up in the consensus world that is steeped in distortions of the patriarchy. Remember, though, that the intent of these two, as they started brand new multi-year cycle, is going to be to love and heal. And what new ways can we recognize doing that? I also think that healthcare, and this isn't just in the US, this can be all over. I also think that, we will continue to blend alternative and traditional modalities in healing. Specifically in the US, as Jupiter Chiron squares the USA Sun in Cancer, as it squares, let me get this right, as it opposes the Saturn in Libra, these two might be a driving force in helping us drive down the costs of medicine. There are 4 states right now in the USA that have petitioned to the FDA for permission to buy drugs from Canada, to negotiate getting lower cost drugs from Canada. This is one of the things that the Biden administration had been trying to do over the last 2 years, was to allow Medicare, which is healthcare for our senior citizens once you turn 65, but to allow Medicare to negotiate drug prices so that we don't have to pay outrageous amounts compared to other countries. I do think that Jupiter and Chiron, again, will start the initiations of some of that. Pluto and Aquarius is going to drive us towards a global village, whether we're ready or not. And over the 20 years of it transiting through Aquarius, every inequality and extreme is just going to get accentuated more and more, become more and more obvious. And so there'll be these pendulum swings moving us towards more and more equality and equitable distribution of resources. It's going to be a part of natural evolution, and recognizing that we all, 8 billion of us, have to survive on the planet. What are we going to do when we get to 9 billion of us? That's going to be part of the major Pluto and Aquarius pendulum swings. Now you can see on your screen here, Pluto dips into Aquarius for 2.5 months. And then it goes back to Capricorn in 23 for 9.5 months. So we just get a big push, doesn't last long. And then we go back to all of the last Pluto and Capricorn ways to review. Next year in 24, it will flip. Pluto will go into Aquarius pretty early in the year and be there 8.5 months. And then the last few months of 24, it'll dip back into Capricorn. So those are the dates that you can refer back to if you would like to. And so here is Pluto ingressing into Aquarius the first time. Again, the second and third ingresses into Aquarius occur next year in 24. What comes out so dominant here is that Pluto is in orb of squaring the nodes 3/4 of 23. And so are we going to be evolving Pluto or creating what EA calls those skip steps, which would mean re-imprinting all of our patriarchal distortions? Now, Pluto is going to be an orb of squaring the nodes while it's in Aquarius, and the nodes are in Scorpio, Taurus. And that's going to pertain more to the intensity of power struggles and money and resources. Some of it won't have to deal with, technology, the fairness and equality themes. Pluto's actual square isn't going to happen till July, when the nodes dip back, or when the nodes move into Aries Libra, while Pluto dips back to 29 degrees Capricorn. So think about this one. Pluto squaring the nodes. All of these Plutonian themes that you think about, and Pluto rules this south node in Scorpio. How are we going to share resources? Scorpio is merging with another. Scorpio is shared resources. We can see more financial extremes and upsets that can come along. I have some slides at the tail end about the economy and finances. I decided to put those all together right at the end. So I will speak to that in more detail, but we can, we're going to have nodes in Taurus, Scorpio, as well as Aries, Libra here. So, and with what our Federal Reserve is doing, which again, I'll speak to down the road here. Point was, there's going to be more major upsets with economic issues and resource issues, but there can also be the rewards. If there have been, again, prior efforts, that have been made in sincere ways, we can see South Node in Scorpio bring an inheritance, or, bring some business venture that just kind of takes off and starts to really grow. But Pluto square the nodes is also going to be asking us to learn how to simplify our values and to learn how to take care of ourselves with our own food, clothing, and shelter. The other thing to me that just stands out, and you can see it right here on your screen with the Pluto ingress, is if you include Eris, you have 6 planets in Aries. Initiation, independence, upsets, violence, freedom, aggression. I thought about that and I go, God, that many planets in Aries. It was like when Uranus went into Aries in 2011, and it was like the day after it went into Aries, we had the earthquake in Japan and the Fukushima nuclear meltdown. I mean, again, to the moment. We could see something like that going on with Pluto's first ingress with these many planets in Aries. Earth event, geopolitical event, who knows? Somebody somewhere wants to bust out, break free Aries. And if we have Pluto square the nodes with the patriarchal distortions, we can have the power grabs. We can have, I'm going to get mine before you get yours. Stay tuned. I just find this to be a pretty powerhouse of a chart. Yes, grateful for the grand trine in almost all water. Mars is still late Gemini, so maybe there is a little bit of a mental, emotional maturity and balancing that may be added to the picture. Stay tuned. Who knows? We'll see how it goes. Some of my key things. Pluto in Aquarius is going to be a 20-year transit that rebels against Capricorn themes. When you get these slow-moving planets, they always break free to evolve whatever archetype came before. It's not just Capricorn to Aquarius. It can be Aquarius to Pisces and Pisces to Aries. It's every archetype breaking free from the one that came before. You look at these slow-moving transits of the outer planets and the fact that Capricorn specifically can represent patriarchal distortions on the planet. We really want to break free from all the Pluto and Capricorn stuff we've seen over the last 15 years. We cannot continue to have the resource inequalities on this planet that we have and survive. Sooner or later, others are going to say, I need food, clothing, and shelter too. I need to be safe from climate change too. Now, the Aquarius archetype contains 3 different parts. Those that defend the past, and that is represented by Saturn, which was the traditional ruler of Aquarius before the outer planets were discovered. Then there are those who want to charge forward into the future, avant-garde. It's represented by Uranus, which became the new ruler of Aquarius when it was discovered in 1800s. And then those who sway back and forth in the middle, influenced by wanting to feel secure with the past and wanting to, break free and move forward into the future. It's the blend of Saturn, Uranus. And so we've got the swing forward and back that will happen through Pluto and Aquarius. And it'll go back and forth depending upon how collective groups of people respond and or react to whatever tends to be happening in their communities, in their countries. To say that Pluto in Aquarius will create shocking events and cataclysmic evolution is probably an understatement, because Aquarius rules trauma. I'll mention that in a moment. And so if we have those upsets, again, we'll have those who just want to go back to yesterday. And we'll have those who say, well, Jiminy's, if, we're going to get 20 inches of rain in a week in California, we maybe don't want to build our houses at the edge of a cliff. We maybe want to create some, different ways that we look at infrastructure when we have to rebuild. And so over the passage of Pluto's 20 years in Aquarius, we will see evolution. It will be a combination of uniform, day by day, year by year, and cataclysmic. Something comes about that brings about a change so strong that it just doesn't make sense to go back to yesterday. And no matter where we live on planet Earth, we will all see some types of combinations of all of that. Now, this time that Pluto transits through Aquarius is very different from what it was 250 years ago. Now we have the internet, we have technology, we have all these social media companies. We are a globalized world, and we can react and interact instantaneously to events. So that going back to the old patriarchal patterns, it won't be as easy to do this time around with Pluto and Aquarius, because groups, example, even though Pluto's not in Aquarius yet, Saturn is. China, going through 3 years of lockdowns, and finally the people starting to rebel so heavily that the government in China backed off. And now, you don't see it or hear it so much in the news unless you're looking for it. But the mortality taking place over there is ridiculous. And Aquarius rules contagions. And so it is possible that we'll see more waves of the coronavirus come about in China naturally. Not saying any opinion on how it started, and spread across the globe. Pluto and Aquarius will still see autocratic versus democratic societies go back and forth for supremacy. The technological advances are going to blow us away through the next 20 years. I'll touch upon those when I do Pluto in Aquarius Part 1 webinar. But we always have ethics trying to catch up to technology. In a natural law world, we would consider ethics along with technology. But in our broad patriarchal distortions, we don't take that into consideration. And then we wonder why we have all these, religious, spiritual clashes over what's it all mean. And of course, just the fact that Pluto and Aquarius will bring about cataclysmic events. And it's not even just that, it can, climate change is going to be happening because it's bigger and broader than any one planetary transit. But every time we have these climate change upsets, the planet's going to get smaller, 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 because more supply chain disruptions will come about. And it's going to cause this chaos of going, oh, wait a minute, maybe we try to supply it all for ourselves in our country. Who knows how the upsets are going to be? But it's going to disrupt the flow of things. And so more and more people are going to have greater health threats, and it will continue to cause geopolitical unrest and, fighting for the limited resources. And so change is going to speed up, whether we want it to or not. We know through the measuring of planetary cycles that they operate pretty systematically. They operate with, their degrees pretty reliably. However, it doesn't appear that way when we go from an earth sign to an air sign. And so, with trauma, it specifically relates to the archetype of Aquarius, whether we're talking about this life or past lives. EA's definition: trauma is an intense disturbance caused by a shocking event or stress of any sort that has a lasting effect upon us. And we all have an individuated unconsciousness, which is ruled by Aquarius. And so we all have the suppressed traumas. 85 to 90% of us are born with past life trauma. And that suppressed trauma dictates subconscious behavioral reactions. All you've got to do is reflect on your own behavior or look around you and see how you have those instinctive reactions to your perception of trauma. You may not even be experiencing a traumatic event, but you perceive it that way, and then you're triggered all over again. And so Pluto and Aquarius, I've been telling many clients, It's going to bring back that metaphysical movement because trauma is going to be made conscious again. And so we have to make a persistent effort to change the effects of trauma through both alternative and traditional therapies. In other words, working through the trauma versus ignoring it or suppressing it. You know, we've heard of those using, God, I call it ecstasy, MDMA or something like that, and LSD, mushrooms, all your hallucinogenic substances, natural and human made, that they are using with PTSD veterans to help them move through it. Just one example. There will be other kinds of therapies that will break free and come through to help us work with healing these traumas. Now, as I said before, the Aquarius archetype relates to a contagion. Physically, it's a disease that's communicated either, close contact through the air, Aquarius's air element, or an exchange of fluids. But we also have the psychology of a contagion, which is the spread of a behavioral pattern, attitude, or emotion from person to person or group to group. All of that will continue as well. Pluto in Aquarius doesn't guarantee us enlightenment. The opportunity and potential is there, but it's how well we can break free. Fixed air. That's the intent of the 11th archetype. Stay tuned. We'll watch how all of us move through it. But the whole contagion thing with the coronavirus came through with Jupiter and Saturn in Aquarius. Remember, they had their conjunction at 0 degrees Aquarius on the winter solstice 2020. And we went through 2021 with Jupiter in Aquarius, Saturn in Aquarius, Pluto moving into Aquarius. There will be more mutations of not only viruses, but bacteria and fungi as well. And I can even include prions in this. And prions are those incomplete proteins that accumulate in tissues and organs of the body. Think mad cow disease, scrapie in sheep, Yock-Felt Jacob disease in humans with the brain, the wasting diseases of the brain. But they will accumulate in all kinds of tissues and organs. More on that stuff in Pluto and Aquarius webinar. Just wanted to touch upon this. We'll see all these themes for the 3 months that Pluto is in Aquarius. And when it goes retrograde at 022 Aquarius, okay, that month and a half that it's retrograde in Aquarius will boom, 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 get all these themes coming up that may back off, may not leave, and then they cycle back around again in 24 and 25. More highlights moving along. In April, May, we have a North Node eclipse season. You can see the dates and degrees on your screen there. We have one of those Mercury retrogrades that are going to take place in an Earth sign. We're going to have look at this one, okay? Mercury is going to go stationary direct May 14th at about 6 degrees Taurus. 2 days later, Jupiter moves into Taurus for a year. So we got a back-to-back energy right here. That again can have to do with resources, both financial and economic, can do with the earth, because Taurus physically ruled dirt. It rules the ground. It rules that outer mantle of the planet. And then we also can see Jupiter's going to conjunct the North Node before it leaves, and we have a Venus retrograde cycle coming up the midst of the year. And when Venus goes retrograde, if it's one sign, that means that Venus is in one sign of the zodiac for 4 months. This will be a little bit of feistiness coming along. Let's move through my screens here for you to look at that. First of all, the eclipses. I did all 4 eclipses of this year I did standalone charts for Washington, D.C. So you can see the dates here and you can see the charts. Excuse me. Sorry about that. Remember the Pluto Aquarius Ingress number 1, March 23rd, all the planets in Aquarius? Well, guess what? On the North Node solar eclipse, we have the moon back in Aquarius again with all of these planets. And so we have a strong energy on the North Node eclipse season to really emphasize moving forward and making, those new beginnings as the nodes are still in Taurus, to get in touch with those values and the food, clothing, and shelter resources that we all need. Pluto is going to be in orbit squaring the nodes on all 4 eclipses this year. Power struggles, did I mention that? Did I mention the new beginnings? Are we going to learn how to get along together, South Node and Scorpio? Stay tuned. We'll find out. Specifically for the US, with this eclipse at, 29, almost 30 degrees Aries, it is going to activate this Mercury Pluto opposition, and it will draw in the USA T-square with Chiron. All those Aries planets then come on to this Chiron. And so, again, power struggles in all kinds of areas in this country. We're not going to find ourselves getting along overnight. I think it's quite likely that the Republican control of the U.S. House is just going to be, inertia and battling all the way through the next 2 years. I don't see them magically waking up one day and deciding that they all want to get along together. There's too much polarity within just the Republican Party itself. And, the ones that are refusing to elect McCarthy as a House Speaker right now, they have some points. It is an elite system. And Pluto, New Phase Pluto is saying, what are we going to do differently? Stay tuned. We'll see how all this tends to move itself through. But we can probably say on this North Node solar eclipse in the US, something will be breaking in the news in regards to the good old power struggles. Now, I mentioned this later on, but if you want to look at the transiting nodes, the South Node at 4 Scorpio, North Node 4 Taurus, they're within orbs of squaring the USA nodal axis. There you go. The discord and kind of like retreating back into our corners that are happening between progressive and conservative ideologies, between inclusive, exclusive ideologies. More of the same is emphasized with this. Now, here is the lunar eclipse that happens 2 weeks later on May 5th. And here what we find is some of those Aries planets have moved over into Taurus. The lunar eclipse creates more of an emphasis in the Taurus Scorpio energy. We see that this lunar eclipse is going to take place at 15 degrees Taurus Scorpio. All right. Still have Pluto square the nodes. As I said, it's going to all year. Mars is almost in orbit squaring. Okay. Here's the exact date that the transiting node square the USA node. It happens before the eclipses, but they're still within orb, and that energy will be magnified on this solar and lunar eclipse. One of the things that I said, can we reach collective crossroads in the emotional psyche of our country? Stay tuned. Time will tell. More aspects going on. I'll let you play with them yourselves. I think I better be conscious of time here. Here's the Jupiter ingress into Taurus chart, which will happen on May 16th. Remember, 2 days earlier, Mercury went stationary direct at 551 Taurus. Okay. As Jupiter moves into Taurus, here it is, conjunct the North Node, in addition to Mercury. Opposing South Node, and squaring Pluto. Have we talked about any of this stuff yet? And now we have Mars moving into an orb of opposing Pluto and then squaring the nodal axis as well. And so, again, Taurus, emphasis on values and survival, prioritizing the basics in life, improving the relationship we have with ourselves. Taurus, self-reliant, self-accepting, self-loving. How are we going to move forward in a self-reliant manner? Now, Jupiter can bring in a deep psychology to understand whatever metamorphic leaps of growth are necessary in our life. As Jupiter moves into Taurus, Pluto is barely turned retrograde at 018 Aquarius. And so it's squaring Jupiter. Okay, they have one first quarter square. I think I've got that coming up down the road here in another slide. But there's the metamorphic leaps. Jupiter first quarter square Pluto. What is building up in pressure? Fixed signs that I have to make a change. I'm under pressure. Can't do this way anymore. And it could easily, with the nodal axis there and that plethora of planets in Taurus now with this ingress, it could easily lead to resource issues. And will we see some resource excesses on display where it's like, I'm sorry, just can't deal with this anymore? I did look up the Elon Musk chart. If any of you want it, his chart is January 28th, 1971, unknown time. January 28th, 1971, Pretoria, South Africa. And I didn't see so many aspects in 2023. He had multiple aspects going on in his chart in 2022. I can't remember what was in Aquarius, but Saturn in Aquarius was really providing a reality check for him. And I think as we're recording this webinar, he's lost like a third of his wealth. Went from being richest man in the world to I don't know where he is right now. But we do have a grand trine in water here. And if we work with this ingress chart over the next year with Jupiter, it's going to ask us to trust our intuition. Because the intuition, while it, yes, can work on mental levels, that sixth sense, knowing that we know something without knowing quite how we know it, so many times it comes through for us on emotional levels. And so this water grand trine is going to say, trust your intuition. How does it feel with this resource issue? How does it feel with this career issue? How does it feel in valuing myself in regards to relationships? Now, Jupiter tends to be a little more active than Saturn and the rest of the outer planets because it will move through a sign of the zodiac in a year, and then it goes through a list of aspects. And so I have put a green aspect wherever there's a one-off aspect, green asterisk by a one-off aspect. There's my language. We already looked at the Jupiter Chiron conjunction. So I went ahead and went from Jupiter's second ingress into Aries, okay, to how it goes through that transit in Aries in 6 months' time before it goes through Taurus. Again, that theme, charge forward, new beginnings, make a difference in your world. Here's that first quarter square that I talked about, which comes, oh, the day after, of course. Yes, that makes sense. Yep, how tight those are. But in its retrograde cycle, which you can see the degrees, 15 to 5 here on your screen, it will make 3 waxing semi-squares to Neptune. And that's where it goes from new phase to crescent phase. Remember, Jupiter-Neptune conjunction, 22 degrees Pisces last spring, 13-year cycle together with a Piscean intent. So as Jupiter goes into Taurus and hits that crescent 45-degree mark from Neptune, okay, this is where we want to gestate our spiritual understandings, and relative to Saturn going into Pisces, really be able to ground it. In other words, we have to be able to walk our spiritual talk. We can't just practice our spirituality from the neck up. We have to practice it in all 7 chakras. We have to live our beliefs. Jupiter's grounding them in Taurus. And so what makes sense to us? What do we really value, Jupiter and Taurus? How do we want to move forward walking on planet Earth? Remember what we said earlier in numerology? This is a 7-year. These Jupiter-Neptune aspects will relate to that inner reflection of a 7-year. Now, mind you, I'm just going to say this out there because I think it'll start to happen after a while. Your astrology calendars really don't use the semi-squares and sesqui-squadrates. And if there is one out there that does, by all means, email me about it. So this aspect could, go unnoticed by a lot of us. So point it out to your astro friends, everybody, as you connect and communicate with them. I decided to follow through on the Jupiter aspects until we get to Jupiter in Gemini. Just to point out, again, goes into Taurus in mid-May, and then it is a full year in Gemini. So Jupiter, went back and forth in Pisces to Aquarius, and then it went into Aries back to Pisces, and it only got 9 months in Pisces with that transit. And I think it's 11 months in Aries. And so now it's up to doing more or less a little over a year in moving through a single sign of the zodiac. You can see the beginning at 24. Jupiter will conjunct Uranus and Taurus. We'll talk about that later. As I said, it is time to integrate the initiations Jupiter made through those first 6 months of this year when it moves into Taurus. And it'll be with the nodal axis in Taurus Scorpio for about 2 months before the nodal axis shifts. And as the nodes finish up Taurus Scorpio, Jupiter in Scorpio, what's it mean? Integrate. How do I make sense of everything in my physical world? How do I really merge on deeper levels in relationships? As the nodal axis finishes up in Taurus Scorpio, there can be relationship beginnings, endings, and recommitments. How is it happening for you? And a commitment to someone else is only as good as our commitment to ourselves. And of course, Jupiter in Taurus is going to really bring about an intent to simplify based upon how those Taurian value systems are evolving. But we can see the opposite distortions of that and material excesses through Jupiter and Taurus that are ridiculous. Ridiculous to the point that maybe there are new laws passed in some way. Or ridiculous to the point that maybe natural law comes along and wipes out somebody's Tesla stock, or wipes out cryptocurrencies that are, based upon more or less Ponzi schemes. More on that later. But Jupiter and Taurus, as I said, it rules the physical earth, Taurus. There can be earth events that come along that can bring infrastructure really into focus. How are we going to rebuild new? And Jupiter and Taurus, nodal axis finishing up Taurus Scorpio, how do we recycle better? And that's going to be a theme all the way through the year that Jupiter's in Taurus. How do we reuse, reduce, and recycle our resources instead of just being so throwaway as we tend to be? Here's Venus moving retrograde in Leo as we move through our summer months. You see its passage through Leo. It goes retrograde at 28.5, back to 8 degrees Leo. And so while the first half of 23 is bringing many initiations and a lot of Aries Taurus energy, me, this is what I want, this is what I'm going to do, this is how I'm going to take care of myself. Venus retrograde in Leo is going to point to that Aquarius polarity. And it's going to be working to help us with objectivity. And so, in a nutshell, if Venus is self-reliant and it's working to deeply love ourselves, then we can evolve our inner peace and relationships throughout its retrograde cycle. We can get those creative sparks for ourselves. But if Venus is insecure, then that Leo retrograde cycle is going to create all kinds of drama Leo and trauma Aquarius, because if we don't fill ourselves up from inside, we've got to get it from outside of ourselves. And so the whole Venus retrograde in Leo cycle, the whole Venus in Leo for 4 months, is about filling ourselves up with self-love and allowing our own cup to overfloweth, so that we have ourself to share with others, so that we have creativity to share with others. Now, this Venus retrograde cycle is going to be pretty darn active. It's always going to aspect Sun and Mercury and Mars, but it also aspects Jupiter, Chiron, Uranus, and Neptune. And so there's going to be enough triggers during this Venus retrograde cycle that it's, we're probably all going to be triggered somehow, some way. Very few of us will smoothly move through this retrograde cycle in Leo. But we want to use those planetary aspects that are going to come up and trigger us in how do, again, I love myself better, Leo. How do I value myself? How do I see my own creative spark on the planet? How do I evolve my creativity in a way that is useful to the planet? How do I honor creativity in others? Here's the Venus retrograde interior conjunction. While Mars and Mercury are not exactly in orb with Pluto, they are pulled in, even though you don't see the blue trine line here. So the grand trine in Earth can calm down some of the Leo dramatics with all the aspects. Also, it's going to bring in a practicality, and it also could have more of the resources and power struggles, because Pluto's still square the nodes as we move into the middle of the summer here. But we also have more trines going on with that interior conjunction, because Sun and Venus at 20.5 Leo will make a trine to Chiron, healing, Eris, really standing up for ourselves, and even be pulled into a trine with the North Node. So being able to, value that creativity in ourselves and others, love ourselves, break free from old relationship patterns, which is what Venus is always doing during a retrograde. There's a lot of trines here to really help Venus out. So make the best of them however you can. Even through Moon in Cancer opposing Pluto and squaring the nodes, we'll have relationship situations that can trigger but bring aha insights and moments as we move through this Venus retrograde cycle. Here's the interior conjunction with the July 4th chart for the USA. And I bring it up because why Venus retrogrades back over the sun at 20.5 Leo, it makes an opposition to the USA moon in Aquarius, and transiting Uranus is in Taurus, making first quarter squares to the USA moon as we have the multiple squares to the interior conjunction. So those public opinions and trends of inclusive versus exclusive, and conflicts around resources. I want mine. No, I want mine. No, I want mine. Well, can our moon in Aquarius in some way stand up for what is more fair and equitable for all of us? Stay tuned. We will address the patterns and themes as it gets closer to the actual time period of this retrograde cycle. More aspects going on. I'll allow you to address those as you look at these charts later. The nodal axis shifts into Aries Libra on July 17th. And as we move to the end of the year, there's just a couple of time periods where it's like boom, 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 bunch of aspects. And right here we have a 6-day time period where we have several, major oppositions going on, squares going on, the Venus retrograde being initiated. Chiron goes retrograde the day after Venus does, and then Pluto squares the nodal axis the day after the Sun squares the nodal axis. And so a lot of activity right here. So that second half of July will have its own little mini burst of activity going on. Here's the Ingress chart for when the nodes slip back into Aries Taurus. Pluto squares the nodes. Oh, and here's a new moon that happens as well just before. So all these cardinal signs, Aries, Cancer, Libra, Capricorn, are activated 2 steps forward, 1 step back. Pluto square the nodes, those power struggles, and then the cardinal signs, the insecurities. What am I afraid to do? How do I find the courage to do it? Maybe I have to speak up in some way. Perhaps there's compromises. How do we get along? Especially from the perspective of the USA, the general public is going weary of this split energy in the USA. Will it be one of those groundswells that takes all the way to the 2024 US presidential election, where we say we're tired of the extremists, we want the candidate who's going to be for common sense and compromising and working together to move the country forward? Pluto, new phase, natal Pluto. The intent of this nodal axis is to evolve our ability to balance a healthy sense of ourself in relationship to others. Also, to initiate new directions as we are emotionally inspired North Node to do so. Distortions are going to be settling for unequal relating patterns, allowing ourselves to be dominated or wanting to dominate others in order to feel secure. And if that's the case, it's going to bring neediness and insecurity rather than balance and independence. So we're going to be reviewing unhealthy relating patterns and changes that need to be made, carrying on in many ways from Taurus, Scorpio. This nodal axis transit will bring up more communications. We can again have even more relationship endings and new beginnings, however necessary. And with the squares to Cancer, Capricorn, we have to include addressing relationships with family and career as well in needing to have changes in some way. We have another Mercury retrograde that comes along later in the summer here in Virgo. And then we have another little time period in which the energy just goes boom, 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 boom. As you can see on your screen here, we have more planetary stations of changing directions that come along in a fairly short time period. 3 planets turning retrograde the end of August, early September, along with Venus turning stationary direct. In addition to that, then we go into fall and we have the South Node eclipse season. And those 2 eclipses are sandwiched in between Pluto going direct and Saturn going direct. So another little mini time period here while in, let's back up one more time for you. While we had, a Mercury retrograde that gets sandwiched in between Uranus and Jupiter changing directions, we have Venus going direct along with Saturn and Pluto. So there's almost like forward, backward, 2 steps forward, 1 step back. As we move through the summer and the fall. Then we have a little time period right here for a week in November. Mars opposes Uranus with a new moon, and the Sun opposing Uranus and Sun conjunct Mars. So remember in 2022 in August, we had Mars with Uranus and the North Node in Taurus. 1 year later, Mars opposes the Sun and inner planets. And so now it's opposing Uranus at the same time the Sun does, and Mercury and Venus do too as they move through their areas. Here's the final Mercury retrograde. And I've ended up with Jupiter direct in there for the end of the year as well. And so here are the South Node eclipse charts, the single charts, and then the transits with the USA July 4th chart. South Node eclipse seasons are going to be relationship reviews, both individually and collectively. We get along or we re-imprint old hurtful relating patterns. Said it before, Pluto's still in orbit squaring the nodes. As we look at the solar eclipse, here's another plethora. Now we have the planets in Libra. The solar eclipse at 21 Libra, opposing the Aries planets, Chiron and Eris. Now, here's what happens with the transits of the nodes as they move into Aries Libra. The nodal axis makes a square to Pluto at 27.5 Capricorn, August 13th. And then the nodal axis squares Mercury, November 27th. And so here we go back to, because it's Pluto, power struggles over, under, or get along. Here we get that weariness of the old relating patterns, but we start to bring in opportunities for communications with the squares to Mercury. and that south node in Libra, and the solar eclipse on that south node in Libra. And Mercury, how are we going to learn how to communicate better and compromise and get along somehow, some way? More that can go on, but I'm being conscious of time here. Then we have a lunar eclipse on October 28th with Sun, Moon at 5 degrees, Sun, Scorpio, Moon, Taurus. And the Pluto orb is now finally starting to separate, and Pluto's gone direct, so it will start to go faster in its separation as we go through the last couple of months of the year. But here again, we have an intensity of planets in Scorpio, Libra that will bring up the good old power struggles and resource issues that come along. And when we put that eclipse over here in the USA chart, we can see that the eclipse itself makes squares to the USA nodal axis. Can we reach for a sense of objectivity here, squaring the nodes? Can we have some emotional enlightenments? What kind of resource and social issues will be in the news here? All right, that's the last of my charts. And so I think as we've went through all of this, you've gotten some of the repeating themes. Not the last of my charts, I'm sorry, the last of my presented charts. And here is my slide in which I have listed the webinars specific to these planetary ingresses we're going to have with the nodal axis change and Venus retrograde. I also want to just let you know that I will be speaking at the Norwac conference in Seattle coming up this Memorial Day weekend, and the lecture that I'm most excited to prepare is the Great Ingress Decade. Pluto in Aquarius, Neptune in Aries, Uranus in Gemini, and Chiron in Taurus. So there you are with those. I had said that I wanted to speak a little bit about finances and economy. And so I put these slides at the tail end. These are slides literally from last year that I want to revisit from another year's perspective and also look at going forward. Cryptocurrencies. I've used this slide for a little bit. One of the pros of that is that it can be a digital payment system that eliminates the middleman, sometimes for no fees, but we don't need a digital payment system to do that. If you're familiar with Venmo, you can send money back and forth. PayPal, if you choose to send money to a friend, you can do that sometimes without a fee. Zelle is another one that's coming up, so you don't need a cryptocurrency to do that. One of the reasons why I have not been very much a fan of cryptocurrencies is because they're so energy intensive. They take an extreme amount of electricity, and it is totally unsustainable in regards to resources. Oh, extremely volatile investment. Those who want to control it can turn it on and off. The Federal Reserve Bank of New York is doing a pilot with a central bank digital currency central bank, and they're doing it on the wholesale. In other words, in New York, they're doing a pilot of it to do international exchanges with resources, which can sometimes take up to 2 days. and with the digital system, and they're not using a cryptocurrency, okay? They're just going to digital. They can shorten up that exchange from 2 days to 10 seconds. Now, the cons of that is that if you have a central bank that's in charge, they can turn it on and off. And so while we had midterm elections that didn't bring up as much as about cryptos as we thought about, we can still perhaps look for regulations to come down the road here over the next 2 years of Congress. And we can still look at democratic and autocratic countries going back and forth with cryptocurrencies to see how they are going to use them. They might be more interested in blockchain, which may or may not be as energy intensive as a cryptocurrency where the medium of exchange is used only once. Stay tuned. This whole area is just going to continue to evolve and unfold, and it's happened through the nodal axis transit of Taurus, Scorpio. It will continue as Jupiter transits through Taurus, and even Pluto and Aquarius squaring Taurus, Scorpio will bring more of it. One of the things that happened with the FTX exchange with cryptocurrencies, it operated more as a Ponzi scheme. It kept needing a new influx of resources in order to make the exchanges that they were making, and the owner was taking out more funds than were coming in, along with other things. Let me move forward just a little bit. You'll see a PDF up there on an excellent article that I mentioned last year that is still valid for right now. Inflation is held in check when supply and demand increase together. What we had happen with the coronavirus is that the supply chains got interrupted. Have any of you tried to go out and buy eggs? Have you noticed the price of eggs? We have an avian flu virus going on, and it is decimating the chicken farms that produce our eggs, especially on a mass level. And I'm even talking, organic free range eggs, which is all I buy because it's all that my system can digest. But the supply chain was disrupted. And so just the most recent example of it, why those supply chains are smoothing out, I feel that they're going to continue to be disrupted with Pluto and Aquarius and climate change. And so one of the things that's involved in all of this behind the scenes is a process by the US Federal Reserve that's called quantitative easing. And this is where monetary policy via a central bank purchases government bonds or other financial assets from banks in order to inject money into an economy to expand economic activity. It first started in Japan in the 1990s, but it also started in the US in the 1987 downturn. I can't remember what that was called, but Alan Greenspan was the Fed chairman then, and we started doing a form of QE, quantitative easing. Once you start that process, it's hard to reverse. The reverse of that is called quantitative tightening, and that's where the Feds starts to sell those government bonds and assets, okay, to slow down the economy. Well, we really started that QE process in earnest after 2008. We went in and saved the derivatives market. And then when we tried to start reversing it or reducing it in 2018, it just created an upset. Everybody was getting used to interest rates of almost, 0%. And so those that had lots of money and resources started doing a lot of speculative investing. And so instead of putting money into infrastructure or, creating something new, we started going into asset bubbles. Big investment companies started buying up houses and then renting them and raising the rent prices until we couldn't afford it anymore. We had the corporate buyback stocks that went on. And so there is this theory that the USA Federal Reserve is going to continue to raise interest rates to slow down the economy, and it will do it at the biggest expense of the poor and the middle class. Because what will happen, businesses still have to pay their bills. The first way they're going to start doing things is laying off. We haven't seen it come yet. Stay tuned. We'll see if that comes through in 2023, or if the USA Fed can slow it down enough to cool off this free money without destroying the market or disrupting businesses. So there were a lot of those who were taking that low interest and leveraging to buy into the cryptocurrencies. And as the Fed started raising the rates, that got exposed and everybody wanted to start taking their money out. There are some big housing firms, Blackstone is one of them, that has put limits on people taking money out of them because the housing market has decreased by 30% and nobody wants to go and buy houses anymore. So what the Feds is doing without saying this is they're doing a QT. They're doing a quantitative tightening through raising the interest rates and slowly and quietly, okay, selling off bonds and financial assets from banks that they've bought. So stay tuned. We'll see if they can cause a situation where the money goes out of these schemes and goes back to more traditional investments. Who knows? Stay tuned. We will find out as we go forward over this next year how that's actually going to take place. Now, I don't have a slide for this, but one of the things that is, it's not even a downfall, but it is just the way our USA Federal Reserve works, okay? Our Federal Reserve controls the demand side, okay? Remember, when demand and supplies raise equally, inflation stays in check. When the supply chain gets disrupted and there's too much money chasing too few goods, okay, inflation raises. I can pay more money than you can for this car. And so the Fed raises interest to lower demand, but it doesn't do anything with helping the supply side of the equations. And that's what's going to be one of the next things that has to start coming through as Jupiter goes into Taurus and as Pluto goes into Aquarius, creating a more equitable balancing of resources. But Pluto in Aquarius, and I'll go through this in a more, I'll try to do this in a more succinct level in my Pluto and Aquarius workshop webinar. But Pluto and Aquarius ruling, cryptocurrencies, ruling the technological currencies. There are also going to be central banks, okay, of various countries wanting to go to these digital currencies because they can control them. China already does. China already has what they call a social credit score. And if you have bad credit in China, they will cut off your ability to access or spend money. I'm not hearing much about that. And so what really needs to happen in the US is to do what we did in the 1930s and create an infrastructure bank, or to do what the state of North Dakota has done and create its own mini Federal Reserve, the Bank of North Dakota. All the state of North Dakota has to put all of its resources into the Bank of North Dakota. Its money doesn't go to Wall Street, its money stays on Main Street. And 750,000 people in North Dakota are sitting on about $5 billion worth of cash, because for the last 100 years, that's what they've done. And it's not the oil that brings them the money. It's the fact that their own bank spends it back in. We happen to have a chart on the Federal Reserve Act. And so what this did back in 1913, it took away the right to create money from the US Treasury, and it gave it to the private Federal Reserve, which is governed by the 12 Federal Reserve banks, which are controlled by the banking system. Well, here's the buy wheel for the July 4th chart and the Federal Reserve chart. And so in essence, there's a lot of sleight of hands that, hide and diffuse the intent of this act. The fact that the Federal Reserve South Node sits on Neptune, and we tell you one thing, but we're doing something else. The fact that, Uranus and Aquarius says, well, we need to have an independent Federal Reserve to do what's good for the best of us. But that's not necessarily the way Fed policy works. It works for the upper class at the expense of middle and lower class. There's other things. Here's Neptune over Mercury. We say this when we mean another thing. And it opposes the USA Pluto exactly. So here we've been in 2022 with Pluto transiting Pluto over the natal USA Pluto 3 times, but it has also literally opposed the Federal Reserve's Neptune 3 times as well. And so here they are playing monetary policy with raising interest rates, again, at the expense of hurting the small business owner, which still has to borrow to create the goods to sell what it makes, etc. And so, there's a lot you could just look at with this chart. Jupiter in Capricorn, controlling the soul of the country financially, taking away the right to coin the money thereof, and it exposing this Mercury as well. Stay tuned. We will see what the Federal Reserve does as we move through 2023. Finally, here is that third Pluto return on December 29th as the third wheel in the tri-wheel. And again, you can see Mercury, the Mercury retrograde exactly on Mercury, the Venus there with the Pluto, the Mars retrograde that's going to go stationary direct on the natal USA Uranus is also went over the Fed Reserve Saturn in Gemini, another, telling you one thing, doing another, duplicity Gemini here. That's been activated over the last part of this year. And there are those people who go, why is the Federal Reserve still raising interest rates? Well, there's much going on behind the scenes, and you can go research this for yourself if you want to. Again, I've tried to simplify it. We can't continue with the last dozen years of quantitative easing with zero interest rate that exacerbates the wealth extremes and takes money from poor middle class to the rich, and it's unsustainable. And so the Fed's trying to do a very quiet QT, quantitative tightening. And it's almost playing Russian roulette. It crashed FTX. There are those that feel that's one of the main things behind it. What else will happen? With Jupiter moving into Taurus, the trauma of Uranus and Aquarius 3 months, what will be the next major financial or business that will have an upset because it was playing, fast and easy with leveraging cheap money to invest in resources that's no longer working? Stay tuned. Here's my soapbox, the public banking solution, banking on the people, where Ellen Brown goes back and forth between digital banking and more traditional banking, public banks, as we talk about. And here's the Bank of North Dakota. I won't bore you a lot with that, but you can sure read about it. This is a very good article right here about the public banking movement versus the raising interest rates that goes on. And then, of course, the National Infrastructure Bank. There are those in Congress, mainly Democrats, that want to do what we did in the 1930s when we had I'm looking to see what it was called, the Reconstruction Finance Corporation of the 1930s, that basically started the CCC and, through the Dust Bowl, put the unemployed to work building bridges and highways and, public buildings that literally took us, out of the Depression and put money in the masses. And so that whole public banking structure that the Bank of North Dakota has, that the US had in the 1930s, now the word for it is a National Infrastructure Bank. In other words, a bank that does exactly what our public bank does, but instead of the interest going to the private stockholders, it goes back to the public coffers, and it builds another library, it builds another school, it builds another hospital, etc., etc. All right. Thank you for allowing me to just speak on that. And here's my last slide. Questions or comments? I've reached the end of the PowerPoint slides.
Let's see if there's any questions, Kim. I'm just checking the board here. Looks like someone's asking about the mantra for nodes in Aries Libra. Can you help with that?
Well, the evolutionary astrology mantra for Aries is initiate with consideration of others. I initiate with consideration of others. That would be more in line with North Node Aries, South Node Libra. But I'll give you the flip one. I'll give you the Libra mantra as well. I balance a diversity of relationships with my own initiative. I balance a diversity of relationships with my own initiative.
All right. Other than that, I think we're done. Just want to let you know we got all the prices changed on the website for the Astro Library lifetime access subscription. It's not a subscription because you don't have to worry about renewing it, but that's been done, as well as the segment 1 and segment 2 price changes. I see a lot of, obviously, I'm just overwhelmed by the amount of information that Kim can put out in a 2-hour webinar, but so that's just my deal. But we got a lot of students here. So anybody interested in going into segment 2 material, just know that the sale price on a segment 2 material is $225 because we've included all the segment 3 health and wellness information into segment 2. So there's your we invite you to go get the segment 2 information. It's a heck of a lot of value there. Hundreds and hundreds of hours of relationship, astrolocality, and much more. So thank you everybody for participating. And Kim, you got a closing comment?
Hey everyone, take some deep breaths as we move through all the excitement in 2023. I think it's going to be a pretty active year, and it's going to be important that we all find some downtime and inner reflections through the changes ahead. All right, everybody, thank you for listening and be well. All the best to you.